But you all know you're not going to spend $129.95 for it, and you're not going to spend $120 or $115, $110, or even $100. Not $90, not $80, and not even $70 like you may all be thinking.
You were on the couch. It was late, 11, maybe midnight. The house was quiet, the kids were in bed, and the television was still on because you hadn't gotten around to turning it off yet. And then you heard it, that voice. Friendly, fast, absolutely certain that what he was about to show you would change your life. And for the next 2 minutes, you believed him. That was Ronco.
GLH is not a paint or a cover-up. It's an amazing powder that clings to the tiniest hairs on your head.
You didn't plan to watch. Nobody ever planned to watch. You were flipping through channels or waiting for the news or just too tired to get up. The house smelled like the dinner you'd cooked 3 hours ago. There was a glass on the coffee table with an inch of something warm left in it. And then a man appeared on your screen holding a tomato in one hand and a blade in the other, and before you could reach for the remote, he sliced that tomato so thin you could see through it. He held it up to the light like it was a diamond, and he looked right at you, not at the camera, at you, and said, "Now how much would you pay?" And you thought about it. You actually sat there on your couch at 11:30 at night and thought about how much you'd pay for a kitchen gadget you didn't know existed 10 seconds ago. That was the trick. Not that he was selling you something, but that he made you feel like he was letting you in on something. Like this wasn't a commercial. Like this was a conversation between two people who both understood that life was hard, kitchens were messy, and wouldn't it be nice if something just worked the way it was supposed to? His name was Ron Popeil, and for almost 50 years he was the most familiar stranger in America. You never met him, you never shook his hand, but you knew his voice better than you knew some of your neighbors.
For all the work it does, this machine should sell for over $400. You know you're not going to spend $400 for it, not $375 or $350.
You knew exactly how he held up a product. You knew the rhythm of his pitch, the build-up, the pause, the offer, and then just when you thought it was over, those 5 words that became part of the American language itself. But wait, there's more. There was always more with Ron. More attachments, more bonuses, more reasons to pick up the phone. But what you didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that before Ron Popeil sold you anything, the world had already taken everything from him. He was 3 years old when his parents got divorced. 3. His mother and father put him and his older brother Jerry in a boarding school in upstate New York. A place his own family later described as a virtual orphanage. His mother visited once. His father never came at all. Ron stayed there for 5 years, 5 years of waiting for someone to walk through the door and say, "I'm here to take you home." Nobody came. When he was 8, his grandparents finally took him in and brought him to Miami, but it wasn't rescue. His grandparents fought constantly. His grandfather punished him for things he didn't do. The boy who would one day talk his way into $1 billion in sales grew up in a house where nobody wanted to hear what he had to say. And when the family moved to Chicago, Ron was sent to work weekends in his father's kitchen gadget factory, but only on the days when his father wasn't there. The man whose products Ron would later sell to the entire country couldn't be bothered to stand in the same room with his own son. That's not a business story. That's a wound. And the wound never healed. But what Ron did with it, that's the part nobody talks about. He didn't become angry. He didn't disappear. He went to Maxwell Street. If you grew up in Chicago, you know Maxwell Street. If you didn't, picture the roughest flea market you've ever seen, multiply it by 10, and set it on a cracked avenue in the worst part of town. Street vendors selling clothes and kitchen gadgets and stolen car radios side by side. Hustlers and con men and honest merchants all mixed together, shouting over each other, fighting for every dollar that walked past. Ron was 16 years old. He didn't have a booth. He didn't have a permit. He stored his table and his goods in the back of a grimy fish store that smelled exactly like you think it did. He woke up at 5 in the morning, bought bushels of cabbages and potatoes and carrots for his demonstrations, dragged everything to his spot, climbed up on a Pepsi crate so people could see him over the crowd, and started selling his father's kitchen gadgets to strangers. And something happened. Something clicked. The boy who had been invisible his whole life, the boy nobody visited, nobody wanted, nobody listened to, discovered that when he held a product in his hand and opened his mouth, people stopped walking. They gathered around. They leaned in. They listened. Some days he made $500, more money than most grown men in that neighborhood made in a week. For the first time in his life, Ron Popeil had an audience, and he was never going to let it go. By 17, he'd talked his way into a demonstration stand at the flagship Woolworths in downtown Chicago, the highest-grossing Woolworths in the entire country. 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, he demonstrated kitchen gadgets to anyone who walked past. It didn't take long before word spread. Secretaries started taking their lunch breaks just to watch him work. Crowds formed. People who had no intention of buying anything stood there for 20 minutes, mesmerized. His partner later said he was impossible to walk away from. Good-looking, fast-talking, completely in control of every person in that crowd. He was making $1,000 a week, more than the store manager. More than his father ever paid him for a weekend in the factory. And then he realized something that would change everything. If he could hold a crowd at Woolworths, he could hold a crowd through a television screen. He scraped together $500, filmed a 60-second commercial for a kitchen gadget called the Chop-O-Matic, bought the cheapest unsold airtime he could find on local TV stations, and waited. The commercial aired. And people called. They called by the thousands. Ron Popeil hadn't just sold a product, he had invented a new way of selling. The infomercial didn't exist before him. He built it out of nothing, the same way he'd built himself. By the late 60s, Ronco was a household name, not because of advertising agencies or marketing departments. Ron didn't have those. He wrote every script. He directed every shoot, he starred in every commercial, he was the company, and the company was him. The Veg-O-Matic, the Pocket Fisherman, Mr. Microphone, the smokeless ashtray, the inside the egg scrambler. If you grew up in the 70s, these weren't products. They were Christmas morning. They were the box your uncle handed you with a grin because he saw the commercial at 2 in the morning and couldn't help himself. They were the thing your mother ordered at midnight and pretended she didn't when it showed up 3 weeks later in a brown cardboard box. They were the Pocket Fisherman your dad kept in the trunk of the car just in case. Just in case the family drove past a lake and the fish were biting and the moment was right. He never used it. But he never threw it away either, because throwing it away would have meant admitting that the dream Ron sold him at midnight wasn't real. And nobody wanted to admit that. The Mr. Microphone, that was the one that got the kids. A wireless microphone that broadcast through the nearest AM radio. You'd grab it at a backyard party and suddenly your voice was coming out of the radio on the porch and everyone was laughing and your older brother was trying to wrestle it away from you, and for about 15 minutes you were a rock star. It barely worked. The range was terrible. The sound quality was worse. It didn't matter. For 15 minutes you were someone. The smokeless ashtray sat on your grandfather's end table. The egg scrambler lived in a drawer your mother opened once a year. The rhinestone stud setter turned your sister's jean jacket into something she wore every day for a summer and then never wore again. None of these things changed the world, but they changed a Tuesday. They changed a Christmas. They changed the way a family laughed together over something ridiculous that someone ordered off the television at midnight, and that was enough. And the phrases he gave us, Think about this. Think about how many advertising slogans you've forgotten in your lifetime. Thousands, tens of thousands, but you remember his. You remember, but wait, there's more. You remember now, how much would you pay? You remember operators are standing by. You remember set it and forget it. Those phrases didn't just sell products, they entered the language. They became the way Americans talk about selling itself. Every comedian, every late night host, every person who has ever made a joke about infomercials is quoting Ron Popeil, whether they know it or not. Dan Aykroyd's Veg-O-Matic on Saturday Night Live, Weird Al Yankovis writing a whole song called Mr. Popeil, The Simpsons, Futurama, The X-Files. Ron Popeil was parodied more than any salesman in American history, and he loved every second of it because parody meant people were watching, and watching was all he ever wanted. In the 70s, something happened that nobody writes about. Ron and his father, the man who had abandoned him, who wouldn't stand in the same factory with him, became competitors, both selling kitchen gadgets, both going after the same stores, the same customers. The son who had grown up without a father was now trying to outsell him, and he did. He outsold his father, he out-invented his father, he outperformed his father in every way that a son could measure. And if you think that victory tasted sweet, you don't understand what it's like to win a contest that should never have existed in the first place. In 1984, Ronco went bankrupt. The first time. Ron lost everything. The company, the products, the name he had built from a Pepsi crate on Maxwell Street. Most people would have stopped. Most people would have taken the loss and found something else to do. Ron started over. He rebuilt Ronco from scratch. New products, new infomercials, new audiences, and this time, he built something that made everything else look small. The Showtime Rotisserie and Barbecue. You've seen it. You might own one. You almost certainly know someone who does. It sat on the kitchen counter like a small glass oven, and inside it a whole chicken turned slowly on a spit, browning evenly, dripping fat into a tray below, filling the kitchen with a smell that made everyone drift in from the living room to ask how long until dinner. Set it and forget it. Those 5 words sold 8 million units, more than $1 billion in total sales. Ron stood in front of a camera, loaded a chicken onto a spit, closed the glass door, pushed one button, looked into the lens, and said the line. Over and over, city after city, channel after channel, year after year. Set it and forget it. It was the greatest sales performance in the history of American television, and the man delivering it was a 70-year-old who had started on a Pepsi crate in a flea market 40 years earlier. He had come so far, and he had never stopped moving. In 2005, Ron sold Ronco for $55 million. He said he wanted more time with his family, the family he had chosen, the family he had built from nothing, the way he built everything, through sheer refusal to accept that the world owed him nothing. He had 4 daughters. He had a wife who loved him. He had a house in Beverly Hills. He had won, but the company didn't survive without him. That's the part that hurts. Ronco filed for bankruptcy again in 2007, just 2 years after he left. By 2018, it was gone entirely. Chapter 7, full liquidation, doors closed, lights off. The name was eventually sold to a trading company that slaps it on products Ron never touched and never would have. The infomercials stopped running. The late-night airwaves filled up with other things, prescription drug ads and streaming service promos, and the dead hum of a world that had moved on. The couch was still there, the television was still on, but the voice was gone. Ron Popeil died on July 28, 2021. He was 86 years old. A brain hemorrhage took him at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. His family was with him. The man who had spent 5 years in a boarding school waiting for someone to show up died, surrounded by the people he had made sure would never have to wait for anything. He was still inventing when he died, a turkey fryer he'd been working on for over 10 years, because that's who he was. Not a salesman, not a pitchman, not the guy from the infomercials. He was the boy on the Pepsi crate who discovered that if you held something up and showed people what it could do, really showed them, with your hands and your voice and every ounce of belief you had left, they would stop and listen. And for a kid who grew up in a house where nobody listened, that was everything. The next time you're flipping through channels late at night and you land on something that feels like it's trying too hard to sell you something you don't need, some slick ad with a celebrity endorsement and a countdown timer and a website address scrolling across the bottom, remember that there was a time when selling wasn't like that. There was a time when a man stood in front of a camera with nothing but a product and his own two hands and talked to you like you were standing right there in the room with him. He didn't need graphics. He didn't need a script written by a team. He needed a tomato and a sharp blade and 60 seconds of your time. And he earned every one of those seconds because he knew something that no marketing department will ever understand. That the best way to sell someone something is to make them feel like you're not selling at all. Like you're just two people late at night figuring out how to make tomorrow a little easier than today. But wait, there's more. That's what he always said. But this time, there isn't. There's just the memory of that voice, coming through the speakers of a television set that doesn't exist anymore, in a living room that's been remodeled twice, on a night you can't quite place but will never completely forget. The night you almost picked up the phone. The night you almost ordered the Pocket Fisherman. The night a man you never met made you believe for just a moment that $19.99 plus shipping and handling was a small price to pay for something that might actually work. He's gone now. The voice is gone. The couch is gone. The late nights are gone, but somewhere in your kitchen, in the back of a cabinet you haven't opened in years, there's a gadget with the word Ronco printed on the side, and it still works because he made sure it would.